Coordinators. Oh, good afternoon. My name is Michelle Cheney, and I'm a coordinator for one of the Office of Migrant Ed consortia that's called Impact. We're focused on parent engagement, parent empowerment. It's an 8-state consortium. I'm going to share a little about the consortium before I launch into exactly what we're doing with middle schoolers. So welcome everyone. If you want to drop your names, your states, any information about you in the chat room, there'll be a couple of places where I'll ask you to think about some things, and I'll stop and just check out and see who's here with us today. So I mentioned this 8-state consortium. IDRC, of course, is one of the consortia, and then so is Impact. These are the 8 states. It's Arkansas, Colorado, Georgia, Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Montana, and of course, Pennsylvania is our lead state. And as you see there, our priority is to strengthen the involvement of migratory parents in the education of their children. And I will say so much of what we've been doing the last year and a half or so is focusing on the notion of parent engagement at home, right? So we know that schools and migrant ed programs do such a fantastic job of engaging children in their families in the activities of the school or of the migrant ed program. But we also wanted to take a look at what was happening behind the scenes. There are a lot of parents, migratory or other, whose children are highly successful, but don't spend a lot of time in the school building, attending meetings, and so on and so forth. And so a lot of what happens in terms of engaging, supporting their children's academic success happens at home. So I just wanted you to have that lens as we look at the materials today that the consortium has put together and that we're piloting, so that they make a little bit more sense than just thinking about strengthening what parents can do at home during the course of everyday life. That really does have a big impact on the success of their children in school. The 3 areas that we looked at as a consortium were family engagement at home, which I just mentioned. That's been one of our big pillars. Also strengthening family engagement at school or with the school, and that includes any educational organizations like migrant ed programs that may not necessarily be in school buildings, but obviously educationally focused. And then of course, family engagement in or with the community. And so looking at all of those as ways to strengthen what families can do to support their children. Each of the 3 years of the consortium, we focused on 3 different aspects of family engagement at home or school or in or with the community. We looked at family engagement action planning with local migrant ed programs. And we put together a whole set of resources and tools around how to be more strategic with your family engagement action plans. We looked at professional learning. So we've had professional learning communities, professional development. We put together a mini course that migrant ed communities can use, the program communities can use to strengthen what their staff know about family engagement. And then we do direct work with migratory families. And that's the piece that I'm going to share with you today. So just to get you thinking about family engagement, and you'll note that I use the term family engagement versus parent engagement because we are thinking about all the players in the family and the family as a whole. So it includes parents, caregivers, extended family members, and of course the children. So think about this. You can either just silently think about it or you can drop a note in the chat room. But family engagement does or does not affect a child's academic achievement. So I'll give you a minute to think about that. Oh, and I see the chat going up, so you're dropping answers in there, awesome. And then family engagement includes at-home attitudes, beliefs, and actions that support learning, at school events like conferences and meetings or literacy nights, both of those or neither of those. I probably gave that away a little bit, right? All right, lots of answers coming in the chat room. Fantastic. So I hope that you noted that family engagement does affect a child's academic achievement. There's a lot of research to support that the more engaged families are, the less issues there are with things like absenteeism at school, and the more successful students are in school. And of course, we're going to learn that family engagement doesn't necessarily mean that families have to be able to help the kids with homework. So I can't help my 9th grade daughter who's in advanced biology classes with her homework anymore. But it does include things like, do we ask questions about the assignments and when they're due and what's happening? Do kids have strategies that they can use when they need help? Do they have a friend they can call on? Do they know how to set an appointment with the teacher who can provide a little additional help during a free time or before or after school? So we don't have to know the content to be fully engaged and support our children's learning. And then of course, family engagement, as I noted, does include our at-home attitudes, beliefs, and actions, as well as what's happening with school. So school, community, home, all very important. So let me give you just a second to think about what's happening today. What questions do you have about family engagement, and why did you choose this session, or what are you hoping to take away from what's happening today? And I'll just pause there for a second and give you a chance to drop some things into the chat box. And while you do that, I'm going to go back and look at some of the answers. Lots of folks from many different places. I heard PA on there, Oregon, Kansas, Florida, Idaho, North Carolina. Go North Carolina. I am coming to you live from Wilmington, North Carolina. Oh, fantastic. All right, so it looks like a couple of folks that were in a course that Impact recently executed are here today. So thank you, Kathleen, for coming today after participating in our 10-week family engagement course using a fantastic book called Engage Every Family, 5 Simple Principles. If you've not heard of that, I highly recommend it, by Stephen Constantino. Wanting to know what other states are doing, looking for strategies for middle school kids. Fantastic. And you can keep those comments coming. Here's what we have lined up for today. Impact has put together what we call learning kits, and I'll explain those in just a minute, but really it's kind of exactly what it sounds like. It's a little bag of materials that we're going to show the families, so parents and children together, how to use at home when it's comfortable, when it's convenient for them. We do front load that with a PowerPoint that would be done either at some sort of a workshop setting with a group of parents and kids, or family by family, just so that they've got some background knowledge before they begin to learn to use the materials that are in the kit. We also are in the process of putting together a unit on decision making. So the middle school grades, the middle school ages are kind of a tough age group for a lot of different reasons, right? So all of the different changes that are happening physiologically and socially, emotional changes, all that is going on. And it's also a time period where kids are becoming a little bit more independent and wanting to assert their independence. So naturally making a separation at times from family, but at a point in their lives where they really need to be most connected or more connected to family. And we're going to talk a little bit about some brain research for kids of that age. And then at the very end, I'm going to share a little bit about our Family Stories project. All right, so let's launch right into our learning kits. So I mentioned that we have a PowerPoint, and I am going to share just a little bit about that with you and walk you through one of our activities to build some background for the families. And this is on how kids are changing physically, socially, emotionally during this age. And that's kind of that background building and springboard into what the learning kit materials are. So the learning kit materials right now are made up of a few different things. One of them is called Math. It's a wordless book, and it's a fantastic book. It's about a young man who, as you can see from the symbolism of the color right there on the page of the book that you see before you, is encountering some dark times. And so we see how he finds the light, and the cat is symbolic of light. We see how he finds the light after encountering some dark times. And of course, the beauty of a wordless book is that the story can be told from the pictures, and we want the reader to be able to bring their personal experiences to the story. So we don't really know what brought on the dark times for this young man. So the families, the kids, the readers, as I call them, can bring their own perspective to that. And of course, can talk about what's happening and discuss in any language, which we always recommend. Then we've got a little card deck. These are our Rethink card decks. This is a fantastic little deck of cards that has sort of little conversation starters on them. And they're in 4 different categories. Things like mindfulness and compassion are a couple of them. And so we want families to build these into the day just to keep conversations open and flowing, and them talking to each other and starting to make sure that communication doesn't break down, or that we even increase it as those more difficult to discuss topics come to light. And then, of course, we've got our Coping Skills for Teens workbook that we selected. And with that workbook, there are 60 different kinds of activities in there for teens to do either by themselves or with other family members as they feel comfortable. And it gets them thinking about a wide variety of topics. And I'm going to share a couple of excerpts from that as well. Lastly, in our kits, we included a blank journal and some colored pencils, because the research also shows that kids really need sort of an outlet or a way to be able to express their feelings. And some kids really like to write or journal and jot down how they're feeling. Others might like to draw and kind of illustrate what they're thinking or how they're feeling. And others might just be able to use the journal to kind of jot down different things at different points in time that they want to remember. But there's a big impact that having an outlet like a journal can have for middle school age kids. And then for our staff, or for the consortium states who are piloting this learning kit this year, and I should mention that it was just finished being developed, the resources selected just a little over a month ago, and all of the states just received their sets of their learning kits, and they'll be piloting them this summer. We have released a facilitator's guide that goes with the learning kits, and it gives everything from how much time the different activities might take to how you might be able to do them, whether you're doing them family by family in the home, or whether you've got some sort of a family meeting, you've got families together in a large group setting. And so a lot of different things in there. And then the actual lesson plans, as I call them, for how to use each of the resources in the kit. And lastly, just a recommendation for a book. We weren't able to include this in the kit, but I highly recommend this book as well. It's called Middle School Matters. This is a fantastic book for any staff that work with middle school age kids, to better understand what it is that's happening with them and what they're going through and how to kind of approach that. It really answers a lot of questions about why do really smart kids do really silly things. And that's just how their brain works at that age. So as I promised, here's an excerpt from our learning kit. And it's just a couple of slides, and then I'm going to turn it back over to you to actually do one of the activities. So what we have here is we talk to the families, and these are the exact slides from this intro PowerPoint and set of activities that we would share with families. We talk to the families about physical, social, emotional, and intellectual growth and balance during the middle school ages. And we explain each of those different areas, just so that we know we're all talking about the same thing, sort of on the same page. We start out by giving them some questions in the different areas to think about that help describe what those areas are. So for physical growth and physical balance, we want you thinking about how much exercise do you get. It includes how much sleep do you get, and self-care. Do you take good care of your teeth, your hair, your muscles, and whatnot? In terms of social growth and social balance, we want you thinking about how much time you spend with others and how comfortable you are with friends and with peers and how your friendships develop, right? What are relationships like with your family members? And are you able to reach out when you need help? And we talk to them about emotional health and growth and balance. What happens when you feel overwhelmed? Do you ever feel stress, anxiety, or depression? And we do talk about how some of that is normal and when to think about when you need some outside intervention because the anxiety or the stress or the depression gets to be too much. And then intellectual growth. And so thinking about what's happening at school, thinking about how you are as a learner, how you like to learn new things or new interests that you might have, how your classwork is going. And so this next activity is one that I'm going to ask you to do, and this is what we ask the families to do. Take out a blank piece of paper or turn over a piece of paper that you have on your desk where you can use the back. And we want you to create a personal balance chart. So you'll divide your paper into 4 squares, and you'll label each square physical, social, emotional, and intellectual, just like you see on the screen. And then think about what would be about a 10-point scale, right? So you see in physical, we've got 0 to 10. And just draw a line up from the bottom to the number that best represents how your physical self is feeling right now today. So if you're really tired and you've been through a lot of activities and email and whatnot today already, maybe physically you're only feeling at about a 5 or half full. And so you don't need to think about the number unless it's helpful, but just think about how high up do you want that bar to go? Think about your social self today. How are you feeling socially? Is this one of those days where you want to call up some friends and get together and do some things, or one of those days where when work is over, you just kind of want to sit on the couch and read a good book or watch a TV show and mentally unwind without others around you? So if you would, take just about 30 seconds and fill in your personal balance charts. And while you do that, I'm going to take a look at the chat room. Okay, you may not have your chart completely finished, and that's okay. You get the gist of the activity. What we would normally have the families do now is, to the extent that they feel comfortable, ask them to share what's on their chart with each other. And if we have groups of folks together, we're going to keep the families all situated together. So it's really only the parents or caretakers and the kids who are talking about their individual charts together. Families aren't going to be asked to share across families. And I think that's important to keep in mind, that we know that some of these conversations may lead down some roads that are a little bit more private. And even if we're in a group setting, we're going to try to protect that privacy as much as possible. So now that folks can see an area that they might be a little bit out of balance in general or today, we obviously want to give them information and tools to help them think about how to get more in balance with those areas. And so just as an example, let me back up. You saw that on our chart here, our sample chart here, emotional balance is the area that we really need to look at. And so the PowerPoint continues on with strategies, conversation starters, questions, and information that address all 4 areas. So because emotional balance is the one here that we're going to take a look at, it's the one that's least balanced. That's the example that I have before you. So for each of the different areas, and in this one, the emotional balance, we talk about how to get back in balance. What are some things that might help you with your well-being in that area, with resuming balance in that particular area? So you see some of the topics here have to do with stress reduction, communication, mental health, and decision making. So we give this information to the families and we talk about it with them. Then we give them discussion questions. So now that we know that maybe a family member is out of balance in that emotional area, and you've gotten a little bit of information on how you might create balance in that area, let's dig a little deeper. So maybe we talk about what's causing you to be out of balance, what's causing you stress right now. How has negative thinking affected your own self or others? How do your emotions get in the way of your schoolwork? So obviously not every question would be appropriate. We would want to dig and figure out why the child or the parent marked that they were out of balance in that particular area, and then use the questions, like I said, to kind of dig a little bit deeper in that area. So I'm just going to pause here for a minute. That is an introduction to our introductory PowerPoint that we'll do with the families before we get them working in the kits, so that they have that background and that mindset about areas being in and out of balance in the areas, the 4 areas that are growth areas for the middle school ages. And since we're a relatively small group and this is kind of informal, if you have questions along the way, pop them into the chat room, and then I'll be able to take a look when we pause and you're engaged in some of the activities. All right. So I had mentioned the wordless book. Man, I already talked a lot about it, but what you'll see in our facilitators guide are a couple of things that I want to point you to. And one is a way to introduce the book to start with. So whenever we introduce a book, anywhere, anytime, we always want to do what I call a book walk, book talk. So we want to introduce the title, the author, a little bit about the book. So I kind of gave you that storyline. I gave you that cueing that happens, a little bit about the character, and then we'll take a look at some of the pictures. Now, this is before we go through and read the whole book. And we want to do that always with any book anywhere, even if it's a novel for high school students. And actually, just to point out, you know, folks who publish books know this. That's why they create the little book jackets that tell you a little bit about the story and the character, whether it's on the back or the insert right on the front cover. And so we know how important that is, and it kind of elicits some, provides some background knowledge so that someone doesn't go into a book cold. As you're reading through the book, we want to make sure that you're making predictions and that kids are making personal connections to the book and being able to relate maybe their feelings and what's happening in their world to what this young man might be going through in the book. We also want to unpack each of the pages. And so by unpacking, what I mean is we're looking at each of the pages and we're telling the story. We're talking about what we think is happening, and we're connecting to friends and family and personal experiences. And so every time that we go through the book, or every person that we go through the book with, we might have a slightly different story as we look at it and think about new and different experiences. And I talked about all those different connections that we always want to make with books, any book, not just this book. But we always want kids looking at the book and making connections to themselves, making connections to other books they may have read on similar same topics, and making connections to their community and the world around them. That helps the reader and the book be more interactive, and it actually raises comprehension. So those are things to think about. Any questions about our wordless book? Lots of opportunities for that to be something that kids could just pick up and kind of look through and think about so many different times beyond the first time that they might do it with the family and the service provider who's using the learning kit. All right, and then our coping skills for teens workbook. So as I mentioned earlier, 60 different activities in here for folks to do. Some of them the kids might want to do independently. So there's one full page that has all different kinds of emotions listed on it. And the kids would be asked to go through and mark how they're feeling. And they can use that page over and over and over. So all those feelings are listed many different times. And it helps them to put words to feelings. You know, sometimes we have these feelings and we're not sure how to express what it is that we're feeling. And so one of the first steps is to be able to connect the words to the feeling and identify the feeling before we can think about how to move through it and what to do with it. So the one that I've selected here for you is one of the activities from the book about what you can or you can't control, right? Also very important for teens or any of us to think about when something is in our power to change and when something isn't, or what is in our power to change versus what's not. And of course, we always go back to that adage about whatever is not in our power to change, what is in our power is how we react to it. So that's sort of the lesson or the takeaway here. So again, if you would, take just about 30 seconds, draw yourself on the back of a sheet of paper on your desk there, 2 concentric circles, just like you see on the screen. And what I want you to do is mark what you can control in the center and what you can't control in the larger outer circle. And you can think about today, or you can think about life in general, but focus on what's in your control and what's not in your control. And I'll give you just a minute to do that. And as you do, I'm going to go back and look at the chat room, see if there are any new comments in there. Oh, fantastic. And thank you. Folks are dropping in additional resources that would be good that have similar kind of activities, or at least address the same kinds of topics. I'm not familiar with all of these, Nora, but thank you. And Nora, hopefully I'll have an opportunity to grab this information from the chat or get a copy of the chat when we're finished so that I have those resources too. I will say is the way that the consortium works while you're thinking about your control, you can't control activity. The way the consortium works is the 8 states, we convene small work groups for the different activities and projects that we're going to take on. And so the major challenge this particular work group had, there were 2. One was just narrowing down the resources that we are able to put in our kit for the money that we had allocated. There was so many great resources out there. And then the other was the language standpoint. So our 8 states all have very different migratory populations, and many of them have a number of different languages and not always the same languages in the same state. So for example, one of the states, obviously a very large state, one of their predominant languages for the migratory population is Spanish, while the other state, their migratory parents predominantly speak English. And so determining what was going to happen in what language, you'll see that all of our resources are in English, but we did try to make it as flexible as possible. So the wordless book was specifically chosen as a wordless book so that it could be used in whatever language was most comfortable for the family. We also do, I should have mentioned this earlier, had the intro PowerPoint, and all of those activities are both in English and Spanish. So as you think about your control, what's in your control, what's out of your control, here's the example that's in the workbook, and your circles may look very similar. You may have the same things or similar items on there as well. And so just a fun activity to, again, start to get kids to think about what they can't control. And then, of course, the next step is how can they react productively to things that are out of their control. All right, so I mentioned the Rethink card deck, and there were a couple of comments in the chat room. These are actually a pretty exciting little card deck. There are 4 different categories of cards: connect, compassion, gratitude, and insight. And these are different examples. So as I read these, just to give you a taste of them, select one and drop your answer into the chat room. Name something that captured your attention this morning. And that's a connect. You don't have to do all of them, just pick one. I mentioned earlier about how middle school age kids begin to assert their independence, and that's part of the natural growth and development process. And we want them to be more independent, but independent doesn't have to mean gone or aloof or out of our reach as parents, as the adults. So while they're asserting their independence and taking more responsibility on, we also want to make sure that we stay connected and we know what they're thinking at different points in time. And so there's just one little thing that might give you some insights into what's happening. How do you show people you care about them? So compassion is one of the categories that we really want to focus on, and not just for this age group, but for all age groups. What are the little things that make you feel grateful? Gratitude. And what is the best advice you've ever received? Insight. So all of the different categories afford the opportunity for cross conversations between parents, caretakers, aunts, uncles, extended family, and children of all ages, of other kids in the family, not just middle school age kids. We encourage the families to use these cards and these prompts together. So go ahead and answer one. Pop something into the chat room. I'll give you a second to do that. All right, while you're thinking about that, and again, go ahead and pop something in the chat room. I see a couple of things coming in. Oh, some good advice. Right now is all you really have. Thank you. And compassion. Listen to people with your full attention. Fantastic. Fantastic. This is just a glimpse as to what the facilitator's guide looks like. And so I mentioned that we've got things mapped out in there about how long it would take and how you might go about doing the different activities. And of course, this is a glimpse at one of the lesson plans, for lack of a better way to say it, but the activity descriptions. So how you would conduct each activity and what the steps are, and what you'll need, and what we hope folks get out of it. All right, so I want to connect these learning kits back to you in all your different roles. And again, if you would, kind of think about how you can use this in light of what your role is, and pop a comment into the chat room. While you're thinking about that and doing that, I will say that because these materials are in a pilot phase right now, they are not on the public side of the Impact website of our consortium website, but I'm happy to give everyone access to them. So at the end, you'll see my email address, and if you're interested in gathering the PowerPoint or looking at any of our training materials that we use to train the staff, getting the list of the activities and that facilitator's guide and everything, please just shoot me an email and I'll make sure that you have all of the resources that you need to go ahead and kind of look deeper into what we're doing and any of the resources that we're using. And if by chance you want to go ahead and create your own learning kits, I would be available to help you kind of walk through the training and think about how you would use those. All you have to do is reach out to me. Please do keep in mind that these are in the pilot phase. And typically what happens after the pilot phase is we tweak things. So it might be that a couple of the resources people really liked and one wasn't their favorite. Next go around, we might replace it with a different, or supplement the kit with some additional resources that people ask for. We often also tweak our lesson plans, so how we go about things, and the facilitator's guide. So just important to keep in mind that it is a pilot. Let me go up to the chat and see what people have said. Fantastic. So we're still looking at the compassion cards and grateful. Very nice. Empathy. Thank you, Alejandrina. I like a place for myself. Yeah, place yourself in others' shoes to be able to feel empathy. Fantastic. Does anybody have any ideas about how you might use the learning kit in your work? So I know this is an identification and recruitment conference this week. So many of you have ID&R responsibilities as your primary responsibilities, but I'm guessing that you also have other duties with being able to deliver services, and that's why you chose this session. So let's see what's in the Dropbox. Life skills classes for the OSY. Yep. these kinds of materials could be incorporated into those. Thank you, Nora. All right, so while you're thinking about how you might incorporate some of these activities into your work, let me go ahead and move us forward and look at one of the other things that's in development this year. So this is our decision-making unit, also aimed at middle school age children and families. And I said this a little bit earlier, but kids of this age who are really bright, even the brightest kids, the most trusted, the most responsible, are inevitably going to make a decision at some point that we think, well, why did they do that? That just doesn't make any sense. And you're absolutely right. So it is normal for kids at this age to make decisions that are impulsive and that don't make a lot of sense to us. And that's because of how their brains are developing, or how their brains are not fully developed at this point in time yet. And so that's what this unit is about. How to think about decision-making, making sure that families all understand how children's brains are developing at this point in time, and giving them a 5-step process for approaching decision-making that they can use anywhere, at home, at school, with friends, and just to, again, think about what's a responsible and responsive way to make good decisions. So we have a couple of things here. We wanted to approach this in a slightly different way than some of the other resources and activities that the consortium's put together. And so this is primarily made up of videos that can be pushed out to the family. So short video clips that can be pushed out to the family. So the very first thing, again, that we're going to do is we're going to meet with families, and we're going to go through a set of activities and a PowerPoint, or just provide the information if the family's one-on-one, about how kids' brains develop. And that's important background building so that the decision-making process makes a little bit more sense. And so that one we'll do with them. That's not one we push out. We want to sit down and we want to talk to them in a one-on-one family setting or a whole group setting with lots of families together, just to take a look at brain development. That PowerPoint is also, or that session has also been developed where it can be done in English and Spanish. Our materials are in English and Spanish currently. But I know that some of our member states are also working on translating them into some of their other key languages, like French is one of them. What has been developed that are short videos that can be sent out are the different 5 steps of the decision-making process. And there's one 3 to 4 minute video for each of the 5 steps. And then we have a conclusion video, another 3-4 minute video, tips for parents around decision-making and supporting their children with decision-making. And so just like we did with the learning kits, I kind of want to give you a glimpse into what the resources and materials and so on will look like, or the ones that we have done already do look like. And so that beginning PowerPoint, that beginning video piece on brain development, we're going to just walk through some of what that is. And what you see here before you, how the brain processes information, neuroplasticity, which is the brain adapting to change, metacognition, which is thinking about your own thinking, and so on. These are the topics that are in this initial PowerPoint video, and they're robust topics, but presented in a way that we think are kid and parent friendly, so family friendly. So let me ask you this, and you can just use the chat box again. Brains are under construction until about what age? So either drop your answer into the chat box or just jot it down on a paper in front of you. Your brains continue, or children's brains continue to develop until when? The frontal lobes are the last part of the brain to develop, so that's a statement. But what do they control? What do the frontal lobes control And of course, important to remember, they're the last part of the brain to develop. And then how does understanding brain development help parents, educators, and kids? So before I give you the answers, I'm just gonna pop back up to the chat room and take a look. All right, we see some answers in here. Kids' brains develop until 17, 18, 25, 20, 21. All right, we're all over the place. And what do the frontal lobes control? I see fear. Anything else? All right, as those comments continue to roll in, let's take a look at the answers. And keep in mind, this is the kind of stuff that we're doing with parents. This is directly from that first PowerPoint that we'll share with families. All right, the teen brain is under construction until age 25. So important to note, and that's why middle school, high school, even young adults sometimes make decisions that are not in their best interest. Their brain is still developing, your brain is still growing, they're still learning. The frontal lobe. So what does it control? The brain's emotional circuit. So your emotions. Other things like organization, decision-making, judgment, focusing attention, and prioritizing. And again, just to reiterate, the last part of the brain to mature. We talk to parents about growth mindset, right? So we want children, families continuing to learn, because learning changes your brain, right? It allows your intelligence to expand in new and different ways. It physiologically creates new pathways with the neurons in the brain. So important to think about growth mindset, continuing to learn and embracing learning. We also talk to parents and try to connect personal stories. So this is one activity that we would ask them to do, to share a personal story about a time that you had to work hard to get better at something and relate it. We show them a little video. So how can you highlight hard work? How can you highlight the strategies that you use? And how can you highlight help from others that you may have gotten? One of the things that we see young adults say very often is that when they see someone who they consider to be successful or who's doing something right, that very often they think that that person is naturally gifted and that it just happened. And so we want to make sure that they know there's a process to good decision making, a process to the road to success that engages hard work and strategies and help from others along the way. So you hear that, you know, authors who write books very often have gotten 4, 5, 6, 7 rejection letters from publishing companies before their book's accepted. And then once it's accepted, they go through the whole editing process. So the different successes in life and the different things that happen go through a process where there's revision and there's support and it's a community. It's very often not just a first time, one person kind of success. And so we build things like that into this set of activities to do with the families. This is our facilitators guide. So just a glimpse, again, it will give you kind of soup to nuts, how long you'll need for each section or each video, the link to the video, the PowerPoints, all of that, and instructions for how to facilitate every single piece of it. So if I have a minute here, let's see if we can get that to play. This is one of our videos, and I won't play all 4 minutes.
Welcome to the Inspire and Innovate Migratory Parent Action Coalition's Decision-Making Series, Part 5, Reflecting on Your Decision. This video series is made possible through the Impact Consortium, with member states in Arkansas, Colorado, Georgia, Illinois, Iowa, Kentucky, Montana, and the lead state, Pennsylvania. The key priority of Impact is to strengthen the involvement of migratory parents in the education of their children. In this video series, we will go over the 5-step decision-making process. In this video, we will go through the 5th step, reflecting on the decision. This video series will provide you with the tools you need to teach your child skills.
All right, so you get just a glimpse. That's what the videos look like. They'll take the next couple of minutes to walk through that one particular step. We have a number of scenarios that the families then will use once they learn the different decision-making steps, and some worksheets that help them think about how to put those decisions together. So you list your options and what would positive outcomes be or negative outcomes from your different options. That would be one way to go about it. And then the other would be to list advantages or disadvantages, very similar to positive and negative, but worded a little bit differently. So after the videos would go out to the families, then the service provider will loop back around to them and sit down and work through some of the scenarios and think about some of the different activities to actually use the decision-making process and address any of the questions that have come up as the families were viewing the videos. And what's really nice with the videos is they're YouTube links, so they can be pushed out a number of different ways, and they're real short so that families can view them together or asynchronously whenever it works best for them. In fact, we're finding that most of the videos are being pushed out through WhatsApp or texting programs that some of the states are using. They're able to just text the link out and folks access them pretty easily. So that's our middle school decision-making unit. And if you would, I've got 3 prompts here that you can drop in the chat room again. I like, I think, I wonder. So as you reflect on the decision-making materials, you might say, oh, I like that you're going to talk about a number of different topics about brain development, or I think this would be great for one of the families that I work with, or I wonder what additional activities we might be able to do. So go ahead and take just a second and drop a comment in the chat box. I like, I think, or I wonder. All right, while you're thinking about that, and again, feel free to drop some comments in there at any point in time, I want to talk a little bit about our last project and probably one of my favorite projects that we're doing. This is our Family Stories project. Each of our consortium states is working with just a couple of families on what we call their family story. It's a multimedia project, so we're hoping that it's more than something on a piece of paper, whether it's audio, video, something a little bit more interactive, and I'm going to give you some examples here in a second. We want families to be able to share a little bit about who they are or what it means to be a migratory family. The thing about this is we put together sort of a resource guide, but we wanted the states to have as much flexibility as possible. So the resource guide just provides some background on why family storytelling is important, and it really is linked to identity and being able to assert or empower families, information sharing. And so there are a lot of really good reasons why we would be doing this. And then we talk about what message do the families want to share? Who's the intended audience? How are you going to share that message, and what do you hope people will get out of it? So behind the scenes, those are some of the things to think about. So we do have a couple examples here. I'm going to start with this one. And again, 3 to 4 minutes long. I think I'm going to try to play most of this for you because it's really interesting. This is from Arkansas, and they were one of the first of our consortium states to put a family stories video together. So this is a video, and this is intended for educators just who may not know migratory families. So maybe their child is new to a school and they can share this with the teachers that the child now has, just to sort of understand what it is that this family went through to get them where they are today.
Me military po yotala yele bioko nane jatili yuko nane jele America ko batestilada nane jatili America ko ne jele America ko ne jatili sarekiyo khotobe khibirbe jatila be awas akhesa
jele moima
mi yuko mi dole yuko bioko yo jemwe o bo bioko ri ne ole ba o tu na da o de le programa ki mi lo de o bo mo de bal filma le ko bu le ko hu o ta ya de o ta mi khala o ti no pa ka bu no mo ta mo ti le ma o sa ne klo
na ta le kle do ile
pa se me da kle da le pe kle le pa pe kle ne ma pe kle wa klo ba to ki mi phe ti so ne pa ka ro ba to pa kwa se me da khang lo ma mà sẽ là ôi rồi khó lo rồi mà giờ phô lên phô thì rồi le tao ở đây mà chỉ là khơi lòng mà luôn nè community khơi à cái khơi này à đây tụi nó được lên rồi nè đã à cái khơi đi bắt đây là cái khơi này ô cái khơi ô hi phô qua cái khơi nó bị lệ phê thay tao bị tao làm anh ấy vậy hè le chỉ có bị ở đây nè akeda pene akeda kiswa ka oje akeda pehele to pehenda ka ru ma chwa oje akebe do pehe bulo de to pa ma chwa le ru ti o khlo ma ma gra hi pho kho ma se ya khlo ma to le pho tho chu tho ko so ko pho chu ko so ta he ya khlo kha chi do ma to tu ta kle ma su do ya di do ki chu ba chu ko akeda pa sa chu ko pehela ma akeda pehe phe wa ma chwa o lo ma to wa ma chwa wa ta ku aku se ata so awe ako ni na we pa pio sino mo pagi bachu mo te ba na ulo da te ba le
All right, you could probably think about, as you watch that, you were probably thinking about maybe some of the families that you know, some of the families you work with and serve on a regular basis, and how similar their stories might be. And so again, just those essential elements that we ask folks to think about as they put together their stories, the storyteller, the audience, and the message. And that's all in the resource guide for how they might go about this, along with questions and storyboarding or story mapping ideas. And so that facilitator's reference guide just is kind of a one-stop shop for a lot of different ideas and approaches and things to consider as you might be putting this together, or our states are putting this together. I also want to say that we do have some of the families in the states that really were not wanting to use video or audio. And so one of the examples I got from Pennsylvania, and I don't know if this will be in the end product or whatnot, was that one of the families was looking at putting together sort of a recipe book of family recipes that had been passed down, like from, you know, grandmother to mother to daughter, and so on and so forth. And I just thought, what a beautiful story to tell through food, right? The story of your family through those family recipes, and be able to honor that. So a number of different ways the states are doing this. And again, all of our materials and the activities are designed sort of the first half of the consortium year, which starts in October, and then will just now begin to be implemented or used or carried out beginning in May or June and finished up by September. So I do have another short story from Arkansas, and I'll just play a couple minutes of this one.
Mi nombre es Cintia de la Cruz, y soy de México. Es en Matamoros, Tamaulipas. Es un lugar muy caliente. Pues hay mucha violencia, la verdad. Sí. Bonito es pues cuando uno pues se va a distraer a la playa, es algo muy, muy bonito. Y lo más feo que he vivido pues son balaceras con uno de mis hijos. Estuve en medio de una balacera y estuvo muy feo. Llegamos a Texas cuando migramos para acá. Nos mudamos a Indiana y después decidió venirse a Arkansas y en Springer, por más que nada porque consiguió un trabajo aquí.
Okay.
Pues eso, el mudarnos, el decidir dónde estar, dónde nos íbamos a quedar, porque yo venía embarazada de mis gemelas y para mí era como que ya no me quiero mover, pero pues yo tengo que pues a donde mi esposo me llevara, pues tenía que seguirlo. Y para mí eso fue.
All right, so we're going to stop it there. I'm going to kind of stop sharing my screen momentarily in case you have questions, and I want to just be able to see some faces before I leave today. My contact information is in WOVA, is in the PowerPoint. If you haven't visited our website, please visit impact.org. There are lots of different resources and materials there. And if you want anything that I shared today, because it's not on the public facing side of our website yet, just email me and I'd be happy to send you the resources and materials, knowing that they're still in the pilot phase. And then if you could take a minute when we're finished here, we have a specific consortium feedback form anytime that I do a presentation, so I would greatly appreciate your feedback. There's the QR code. You can snap that with your phone's camera and it'll link you right to the Impact Consortium feedback form for today's session. Just a few short questions about the information and how it might be useful to your work. So I'll leave that up just for about 10 more seconds, but that again is in the PowerPoint if you want to go back to it. And then it looks like we have a few more minutes if anybody has some questions. So let me come back and take a look at folks in the room. And I'll also check the chat box one more time. But at this point, feel free to turn your camera on and unmute yourselves if you want to ask a question.
I can also stop recording in case anyone's nervous about that. We'll let people ask free.